Hi, good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar, Herbs and Emotional Healing. I'm your host, Steven Horne, and I'm also tonight the presenter. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope that you'll have learned some great things and perhaps get a whole new insight into how to help people to have better health, and also different ways in which you may not have considered that herbs can be used to help achieve that end. I want to start off by just asking you to think about something. What is it that makes a person charismatic? When you think of a charismatic person, what are the qualities of someone who has charisma? When you think about what attracts people to each other. In other words, when you are in a relationship, what is it that draws you into a relationship? What is it that makes you want to stay in a relationship? Also, what primarily motivates you to buy things? Why do you actually make most of the purchases that you make? And finally, what is more important than nutrition to healing? And the answer to all of these is actually the same answer. The answer is it's our emotions. We are drawn to certain charismatic people because they're passionate people, because they exhibit emotional qualities of enthusiasm and joy and things that we find emotionally desirable and attractive. We want to be in relationships because we perceive them to contribute to our happiness, to feeling loved, to feeling joy, which is all an emotional state. If you study marketing, you'll find out that 90% of the reason why people make a decision to purchase something is based not on logic at all, it's based on emotions. And good marketing actually appeals to people on an emotional level, and the logical part of it is just to give them an excuse to follow what their emotions are telling them you want to do. And the final thing about health is the same thing. Emotions. Emotions play a critical role in health. You can have a person who has an illness that is totally recoverable from, but if they've lost the will to live, if they are emotionally just so destitute that they don't care anymore, they won't heal. And in contrast, a lot of times a person who has great motivation to heal or live will overcome great odds in spite of whatever therapies they're using. Emotions are things that are very, very important to our lives. But what are emotions? Well, that's the first thing we want to explore. And when we look at what modern medicine says emotions are, is they say that emotions are just a physical phenomenon. Basically, they are the result of chemicals, neurotransmitters and hormones coursing around in our body, and when we feel bad, it's because there's an imbalance in our biochemistry, and the way to correct that is with drugs, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, etc. In fact, the statement of the basic mainstream thinking concerning emotional healing is there is no ghost in the machine, meaning that everything is purely a physical phenomenon. There is no spiritual component that's apart from the physical that would account for any of the phenomena of emotions. Now, there's no doubt that the health of our body plays a role in how we feel. Obviously, if we're eating healthier, we're exercising, we're getting enough sleep, we're otherwise taking care of ourselves, we're going to feel better. That's an obvious fact. But is this all that there is? Is that the only thing in factor? No, there's not. Now, if we go and look out in popular culture, there's a major teaching out there in movies like the DVD The Secret and other popular things that say our thoughts are what are really creating our feelings, that if we're thinking positively, we're going to have good feelings, and if we're thinking negatively, we're going to have bad feelings. Therefore, the way to heal our feelings is to change our thought processes, to change our thinking, and think positively instead of thinking negatively. So we do this all the time, cheer up, think positively, blah, 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 everything's going to work out, which is saying that our feelings are dependent on the mind. They're a secondary process to our mind. Now again, it's obvious that our thoughts are influencing our emotions, because obviously if I'm thinking about a very sad, unpleasant memory of mine, it's probably going to bring up the memory of those sad, unpleasant feelings. And if I'm thinking about something that's a happy memory, probably bring up happy feelings. So yeah, what we're thinking does have an influence on our feelings. But what happens when what it should be a positive thought actually brings up negative feelings? What's going on? In other words, if I'm thinking about having a great relationship and fear and anxiety comes up inside of me, what's going on? And that happens to people. That happens to all of us, that we may think about making more money and we get negative emotions, or we may think about something that theoretically should be positive, but negative feelings come up. So clearly there's something going on with emotions that goes beyond what we're thinking about. In fact, the popular statement is, as a man thinketh, so is he. There's even a little book by a guy named James Allen that says that, and this is what people often use to justify this. Well, that's actually is a paraphrase of a quote that's in the Old Testament, and what the quote actually says is, as he, meaning the man or woman, whatever, thinketh in his heart, so is he. So what that's saying is, it's not the head that is the source of the energy that's creating our experience of life. It is our heart that is creating the energy of our experience of life. So when we look at that, how is the heart thinking? Well, if the heart thinks, how does the heart think? Well, obviously, emotions are the thoughts of the heart. Feelings are the thinking of the heart. We also have gut feelings, which are the thinkings of our gut. Like if you ever had your gut gnaw at you, well, that's your gut talking to you saying, okay, you're hungry, or you get butterflies in your stomach saying, oh, I'm anxious. Your gut talks to you through feelings, and our heart talks to us through feelings. This is communication, feedback from the physical and emotional side of our nature. In fact, we actually have a heart brain. The heart has a large percentage of it being nerve cells. I've read that as many as 60% of the cells in the heart are nerve cells. And there is plenty of research now showing that we actually have a heart brain that processes information and thinks separately from our head brain, and actually has its own information processing systems. And there's also a lot of research showing that we have a gut brain, that there are a huge amount of nerves and neurotransmitters in our gut called the enteric nervous system, which actually 2/3 of the neurons that connect our guts and our brain are sending messages from our gut to our head, meaning our guts are talking to our head more than our head is talking to our guts. So we have these three aspects of our nature. Now, I've been doing emotional healing work with people for 25 years, and I've had experienced some really interesting things in the process of that, learned a bunch of things. I had a hard time articulating how I was experiencing what I was experiencing until I read this really great book by Steven Horne called The Secret Teachings of Plants, subtitled The Intelligence of the Heart in the Direct Perception of Nature. And I learned about this research from this book, that the heart, it not only broadcasts an electromagnetic field, which obviously you're picking up when you have an electrocardiograph, but it also receives electromagnetic signals from other people and from plants and from environments. In other words, it detects energy and then translates what the energy is communicating to it into feelings. So you ever had a feeling about someone, like you go and meet someone who's a salesperson and you have this feeling that they're sleazy. You can't put a logical thing to it, but there's something about their energy that you're picking up, and your heart is communicating to you a discomfort about them. Or you feel a heart attraction to certain people too. Well, this is due to what we're picking up with this subtle electromagnetic information that we have through our heart. So I believe that feelings are really a result of these electromagnetic vibrations. I've long believed, since I got involved in emotional healing, that feelings are actually an energy, a vibratory energy. Have you ever walked into a room with where two people have just had a fight and the fight is over, but you can still feel the tension in the air? Or have you ever walked into the presence of someone who was very loving and you could feel the love that they radiated from them? Or have you ever walked into an environment and felt really bad, like something really bad or wrong had happened there? Again, this is the energy. So a couple of people have asked about slides. I did finally get the slides for this posted on my personal website at modernherbalmedicine.com at the top of the page, and they will later be posted on the AHG site, but I just managed to get them up there just right before the webinar started. This is another interesting book I read a number of years ago by Dr. Paul Pearsall called The Heart's Code, in which he has all these stories of how people who have had heart transplants acquire memories. They acquire preferences, desires and attractions that they did not have before their heart transplant, that actually are a reflection of the preferences and thoughts and feelings of the person whose heart they received, showing that there is memory embedded in the heart, that the heart remembers things, that the heart actually has the capability of storing memories and communicating things about those memories. So again, this research shows that the heart can think independently of the brain. Again, if you haven't read this book, it's marvelous, and the stories in it are just absolutely amazing about this particular phenomenon. The bottom line, what I'm talking about, is we're actually threefold beings. We have a world in our, we have three chambers in our body, three cavities in our body that house organs. One of them is inside of our skull, and obviously the primary organ inside of our skull is our brain. So that's the world of our head, the world of our thinking and perceiving, collecting information. And then we have a chest cavity that's separated from our abdominal cavity by a big muscle called the diaphragm. And the chest cavity housing the heart and lungs, and that spirit of life, the breath of life, and the feeling of the heart, what we think of as the heart, is part of that world, emotion and spirit. And then we have the world of the body, the world of our guts, the world of courage and action and choosing and doing. I have come to believe that health comes from internal wholeness. That is, when our thoughts, our feelings, and our choices, what we're doing in our life, are in alignment, we are whole, we are well. But what happens when we think one thing, we feel another thing, and we're doing a different thing? Then we have disharmony. We have an internal discord that is basically causing us to not be in alignment. Now, remember, the first question I asked, what makes a person charismatic? I believe the people who have the most charisma are the people who have the most internal alignment. What they're saying, what they feel, and what they do are in alignment, so that you feel the sense of their internal integrity. You feel their passion and their commitment and their integrity, and that has a great deal of energy and power that it gives to that person. When we're out of balance, we're going to eventually get physically ill. And before that, we'll actually be emotionally ill, or we're just not going to feel good, which is a sign that we're suffering from some form of internal disharmony. How many of us know that we should be eating better than we do? How many of us know that we should be exercising, but we don't? How many of us know lots of things we could be doing to take care of ourselves, but we don't? Why don't we want to take care of ourselves? Because something in our emotional world is wounded, and as such, we cannot translate our thoughts into actions. So a holistic model of this, it looks like this. The mind, spirit, and body, or thinking, feeling, and acting, all interplay with each other. They are all co-equal parts of ourselves. So the body is not superior to the mind and the heart, and so forth. We need to understand and work with all three aspects of this. But I find that most people concentrate primarily on the body, or primarily on the mind, or occasionally on the mind and the body, but almost nobody really understands or looks at how to deal with the emotional aspect of our nature. And emotions are important because the primary motivation we have to do anything we do is based in the desire to feel good. If you think about why you want the things in life, why you want to be healthy, why you want that great relationship, why you want more income, it's because you want to feel good. You don't want to feel stressed. You don't want to feel anxious. You don't want to feel distraught or unhappy or sad or angry. You want to feel joy. You want to feel love. You want to feel inner peace. Emotion, if you look at the word emotion, is the ability of energy in motion, or the evoker of motion. It is the bridge that translates what we think into energy that creates activity. And so when you're, for instance, if you want to persuade someone to do something, the first thing that you want to do is get them to understand how you feel and understand what you know, and then you're 90% there towards getting them to change action. And that's actually something I learned from studying marketing. But primarily, it's engaging the feeling, then the logic, and then you'll get action. So when we have unresolved emotional wounds, we don't translate our thoughts and our goals into actions because there's a blockage there. So this is the model that I use to teach people basic emotional healing. Basically, what I'm likening to, since emotion is a form of energy, I'm using the metaphor of color to describe the different emotional energies. And so, like white light contains all of the vibrations or wavelengths of light, when we are able to access and use all of our emotions in a constructive way, then we have a sense of joy, love, peace, or happiness. We're like in the light. We're in balance. When we are out of balance, we get stuck in various emotional tones that color our personality, and all of us, to one degree or another, have our personality colored by our emotional wounds. And the three primary emotions that say we're out of balance in some way are fear, anger, and grief. And I have chosen to equate fear with the yellow, as in yellow-bellied or yellow streak down the spine. Anger with red, as in he saw red or whatever, and also sadness with blue, as I'm feeling blue. So this is the way to metaphorically think about this. Now, those are the three primary negative emotions, and what I'm going to introduce to you tonight is this model that there are three secondary emotional states that are basically colors that happen when you suppress one particular emotional energy. It causes the opposite emotional energies to become exaggerated. So like if you don't have enough red in your personality, it's going to color your personality green, meaning that the yellow and the blue are going to be more dominant in your personality. And I call that depression and discouragement, and I call the repression of grief and sadness being hardened and insensitive, and the repression of fear being compulsive and addictive. And I'll explain to you what all that means as we go on tonight. What got me going in emotional healing work 25 years ago was a radical idea. I had already come to understand that symptoms were the efforts of the body to cope with a problem and to bring the body back to balance. So I had quit thinking about the symptom as being the problem and started looking at the symptom as a message from the body saying something was out of balance, and look underneath the symptom to try to figure out what was out of balance. And then I got this idea and understood that, well, then the example is pain. Okay, we don't like pain. None of us like pain, but pain is a message something is wrong. Now, I can kill the pain. I can take something to numb the pain or whatever, but if I don't actually figure out what's wrong and what's causing the pain doesn't go away. It just gets numbed for a little while and then it returns. The pain is telling me something is wrong and that I need to try to figure out what's wrong or how my life is out of balance. Well, the same thing is true with the quote-unquote negative emotions. They're not bad in and of themselves, just like pain isn't bad in and of itself. They're messages. They're messages from our hearts saying we're out of balance. There's something wrong and we need to look at it and correct it. But what we've been taught largely is to ignore it, suppress it. In other words, to practice what I call emotional allopathy. So one of the messages I have to you tonight is there's no wrong emotion. There's no emotion that's wrong for you to feel, but there are constructive and destructive ways of dealing with an emotion. That is, there are ways of dealing with that emotion that lead us back to health and wholeness, and there are ways of dealing with that emotion that perpetuate the imbalance and allow it never to be solved. The unfortunate thing is, just like we practice allopathy in modern society, and we are in the habit in modern medicine of just never really trying to understand what the real cause is, just suppress the symptoms or treat the symptoms. We practice emotional allopathy with each other in the feeling world too. We give people messages like, don't feel sad, or big boys don't cry, don't you dare be angry with me, how can you be angry with me, don't be a fraidy cat, cheer up, there's nothing to be depressed about. In other words, we tell people, what you're feeling is wrong. Stop it. Stop feeling that way. You have no right to feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way. And of course, does that change how you feel? No, it doesn't change how you feel. You still feel that way. Now you just feel like nobody cares. You don't understand. You don't want to understand, and so forth. And it isn't just the negative emotions we tell people to suppress. Think of a parent telling their child, wipe that stupid grin off your face. Stop laughing. Don't you be silly like that. In other words, don't even be happy. Suppress your happiness. Or don't even feel, you shouldn't feel that way. In other words, your feelings are wrong, period. And we've been given these messages since we're young. And as such, we don't know how to listen to our heart. We don't know how to trust what our heart is telling us. We instead just try to make it go away without ever understanding what is causing it. Now, before I get into the emotional healing model, I want to talk to you a little bit about biological terrain and energetics. Now, this is a model that actually was developed by my good friend and fellow herbalist in the American Herbalists Guild, Matthew Wood, and I had a lot of conversations with him while he was developing this. And he has actually talks about this model in some of his more recent books. But basically, after I finished putting together my model of emotional anatomy, I suddenly realized it perfectly overlapped it with the model of biological terrain. Biological terrain basically is the internal environment or the energetic state of the body. So it's conditioned on three factors: metabolic rate, which is basically the speed of metabolic activity, which is hot or fast versus cold or slow; tissue density, which is the ratio of solid to liquid. In other words, we need about a certain amount of solid to have structure and a certain amount of liquid to have fluidity. So you can go to the side of being too damp, too fluid, or too rigid. And then also tissue tone, which has to do with muscle tension and the control of secretions, which is too tight or too loose. On the one hand, damming things up and blocking flow, and the other hand, opening things up and having things leak. So this is how I teach this. Metabolic rate has to do with energy production in the tissues, and I liken this to the 6 sacred directions. So if you're standing somewhere, there's 6 basic directions that you can go from where you're at. One is forward, and the other one is backwards. Okay, so forward equates to fast, hot, racing ahead, moving forward, energetic, fast, etc. And in the physical body, that equates to hot conditions like fevers and inflammation, which happen when the body is fighting something, when it's fighting an infection, when it's fighting a toxin, when something is irritating it. You see the parallel between that and anger? That we get angry when we feel like something is attacking us or hurting us or damaging us in some way. And to a certain extent, tissue gets angry when something's attacking it. It gets red and it gets hot, which is the same kind of energy as anger. Now, if we go backwards, it's like we're slowing down. We're lacking energy. And so when there's a lack of energy production, when the metabolic rate is too slow, you get cold, you get chilled, you get tired, you get worn down, you lack drive. At this point, the body doesn't have enough energy to fight, and that's why we call it depression. Depression means that the body is not able to respond to a normal stimulus in a healthy way. It's too tired to respond. And when we get too tired to respond, we feel discouraged. We feel depressed. We feel jealous of other people who are happy and we're not. We feel envious of them and their successes or their joys because we ourselves are miserable and tired and worn out and don't have the energy to fight back or respond anymore. The tissue density, which is the ratio of minerals to solids, I use the directions of left and right. Now I choose the right to represent the atrophy or hardness or tension. Actually, it's hardness, not tension, and the left to represent looseness, because I'm using the traditional conservative liberal, the right and the left. So too conservative is too rigid, too liberal is too relaxed, okay? And so it's just an analogy, okay, but it works because it helps people remember that. So when you have stagnation in the tissues, there's not enough fluid, there's not enough minerals to move the fluids properly through the body, so they're stagnating. You get water retention, you get swollen lymph nodes. The body is congested. It can't let go of things. It can't release the toxins. It can't flush out the irritants and so forth. So this really corresponds to the blue emotions, which are grief, sadness, and unfulfilled desires, feeling like, you know, I can't let go. I'm full of pain. I can't. I'm you know, congested, bound up, crying, tears, that sort of thing. On the other side, there's too much mineral and not enough fluid to move it, and everything starts to get hardened, as in hardening the arteries and calcium deposits. The body becomes rigid. It becomes inflexible, unable to move, unable to change, unable to adjust or adapt. And that corresponds to what I call the orange emotions, which are hardness of heart, insensitivity, and emotional numbness, where the person becomes rigid and dogmatic and fixed and insensitive to other people and lacks the ability to flow with compassion for other people and through life. Finally, we have tissue tone. And I've actually debated a little bit about the connection between these two, so I may have yet to tweak this one just a little bit. But constriction is up and down. Those are the last two directions, up and down. Well, constriction is up because we get wound up. And when we relax, we sink. We let go and let gravity take over. So that's why constriction I associate with up and relaxation with down. Well, in constriction, there's too much tension. And when there's too much tension in the body, flow gets inhibited. Like when you get spastic muscle cramps and the blood vessels and the arteries in the blood vessels, the muscles in the arteries contract, which raises blood pressure. Things get frozen. Flow slows down. There's a difficulty responding and adapting in a smooth way. So this corresponds to the yellow emotions, fear, anxiety, and stress. Whereas relaxation, which is direction down, things leak. The body isn't strong enough to hold on to things, to hold its structure together, so it bleeds. There's urinary incontinence, there's diarrhea, there's laxity, there's prolapsus of internal organs, there's spinal collapse, that sort of thing. The body can't hold things up. And this corresponds to what I call the purple emotions, which is addiction, compulsion, obsession, recklessness, where the person lacks good self-control and the ability to manage their life and their decisions in a healthy way. I also want, before I get into these emotional states, to quickly talk about using plants as emotional healers. And the primary way I use plants as emotional healers is as flower essences. So I'll be referring to a lot of flower essences tonight, but I also use them as essential oils. I also sometimes find that you can actually even just sit with a plant and feel its energy and actually let it directly teach you things, which is kind of interesting experience. And also you can actually take the whole herb, and using very tiny doses of it sometimes, you can get the same kind of emotional healing response by taking a tincture and just using a few drops. This is what one of the approaches that Matthew Wood does, and I learned from him. And you're almost getting a homeopathic-like effect from the herb that's dealing more with the subtle energy of the body than it is dealing with the actual physical issue. So for those of you who are not familiar with flower essences, a flower essence is a vibrational or homeopathic-like remedy that's made from the flowers of plants. The original flower essences were made by Dr. Edward Bach in England. There are now many companies, many people who make flower essences. The primary way they're made is by soaking flowers at the height of their bloom in a bowl of spring water, and then in the sun, and then preserving that with brandy to make a mother tincture, and then diluting that down to make the remedy. So they're really a vibrational essence of the flower, which is really the part of the plant that is most strongly linked to our emotions, because the flower is the part that we tend to most emotionally attract to. So how does this all work? How are plants helping people to heal emotion? Well, again, it goes back to this idea, if we understand that emotion is in and of itself in the first place a vibration, okay, then a plant has a vibration. It has an energy, and that plant, like we do, encounters struggles in its life. It has to overcome challenges in its environment like we do. It may grow in soil that's really poor, and it has to struggle to get nutrients out of that soil. It may grow where there's a ton of water and have to overcome that, or really cold winters and really hot summers, or any other environmental things. And that plant occupies a niche in nature that it has the personality, if you will, to be able to successfully navigate the harshness of those conditions. So the plant expresses its personality in its growth. We express our personality in our actions. So when you understand the kind of the energetic of a plant and what its energy or its personality is, you can take that plant and use it to a person who needs that particular vibratory energy to help them learn how to cope with what they're struggling with, so that they can acquire the vibration or the emotional sense of what they need to do to move through what they're experiencing. Now, that may sound really strange, but I've been using flower essences for 25 years, and I've seen this happen over and over and over again. In fact, flower essences have become such an important part of what I do that when I put people on programs that contain herbs and nutrients and recommendations for lifestyle, I almost always at the same time give them a flower remedy to help work on the emotional stuff they're working through, because I find that getting started on working through their emotional issues greatly accelerates their physical healing, because it helps them learn to break through those emotional issues that are holding them back from doing the things that they should be doing to take care of themselves. Now with that, I'm going to launch right into a discussion of the different emotional energies, and I'm going to talk about how this whole model works. If we take any one of these negative emotions, there are two negative choices we can use with it. We can suppress it, pretend we don't feel it, deny it, try to stuff it down on our side of ourselves, in which case it never goes away. As a book by the author Carol Trueman says, feelings buried alive never die. A great title and a great message. Or we can vent them. Now when I say vent them, I'm not talking about expressing them. There is a big difference between saying, I felt hurt when you did this, or I feel angry about this, and saying, you hurt me, or you made me angry. Venting is placing the responsibility for the emotion on someone else, or a situation in your life, and saying, basically, it is impossible for me to feel good if I cannot change this other person or this other situation in my life. And that neither one of those strategies work. What does work is to listen to and understand what the feeling is trying to communicate to you, about what you need to do differently, about how you need to change, and then taking the appropriate action to make those changes. And you'll get a better example of what I'm talking about as we go through these different emotions. So let's start with anger. I've already intimated that anger is the energy that allows us to push things away that are hurting us, things that we don't want, things that are not good for us, that are not contributing to our life. In the body, this equates to the processes of detoxification and immunity, because detoxification and immunity are the same energy on different planes of our existence, meaning they are the ability to push away an infection or microbes don't belong, or to push away chemicals or other irritants that don't belong and get rid of them. How we deal with anger, in my experience, affects both how our immune system functions and how our detoxification systems function. Healthy anger is really the ability to stand your ground. It's the ability to not let other people push you around. It's to be able to assert your right to control your own life, your own choices, how you control your own property. And basically, like the Declaration of Independence says, we have that as an alienable right, which means that what that document says is that God gave us the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of those things that will make our life happy and comfortable. Now, this doesn't mean that other people can't try to take those away from us. People can certainly try to take away our life and take away our liberty and take away our property. But what it means is they don't have the moral right to do that. No one has the moral right to do that to you. And your ability to stand up and say no when someone tries to do that to you, or otherwise prevent them from causing you harm, is what anger is for. Okay? When you have a healthy anger, you can identify, hey, this behavior, this is the behavior, and the person or persons who are doing it that is trespassing against my rights and against my and is not in my best interest. And you can react, and you don't even have to hate or be mad at the people. You dislike that action. You can still love the person, but you dislike that action and you push it away and say no to it. Healthy anger is actually what allows you to stay in control of yourself. And it looks like this. Basically, our personal boundary is separating what is in our control from what is out of our control. So when we are controlling what is in our control, we are dealing with our own thoughts, our own feelings, and our own choices of action, and taking control for that. We're taking responsibility for that. We're being responsible for those choices. We cannot be responsible or able to respond for anything else, because I'm not in control of the economy. I'm not in control of the weather. I'm not even in control of my own children or my partner or even my employees. I have influence on those people, but their choices are their responsibility, not mine. So when I'm trying to control what is not in my control and failing to control what is in my power to control, I have holes in my personal boundaries. And those holes in my personal boundaries mean that I am having issues with understanding how to deal with anger in a constructive and positive way. And I will guarantee that almost everybody that in this society has problems with holes in their personal boundaries. I've struggled with a lot of them and still sometimes struggle with them. Venting anger means that we take the anger and we use it as a weapon to try to control other people. We use it to try to force them to change, whether it's in their best interest to change or not. And that anger can manifest as violence, which is really obvious, hitting someone, striking someone, whatever. But it could also manifest as threat of violence, threatening to do something mean or nasty or whatever to another person. But it can also manifest as deception, meaning doing something that injures or deprives another behind their back, sneakily, hoping that they'll never find out. Or that one of the most subtle ways of all is emotional manipulation, making them feel guilty or bad about themselves, or instilling fear, guilt, shame, or blame into them so we can control them and get them to do what we want. Now you can see how practically all of us have issues with this. Whenever we do that, we are showing a lack of love and respect for other people because we are trying to control their lives without their consent. And that's not healthy. That's never healthy, and it's always a sign of a lack of love for other people. Now, as I mentioned, when the body gets angry and is irritated, you get redness and inflammation. Inflammation is a sign that the body is fighting something, that there's been an injury or a trauma or something to the body that the body is fighting back and going with it. And that often will emotionally go along with you feeling more agitated or frustrated or easily upset. But on the other hand, intense anger, venting a lot of anger, tends to inflame the body, which also makes you more prone to those kind of hot inflammatory conditions. So it's been well researched, for example, that people who have a lot of anger are much more likely to have heart attacks and are much more likely to die from a heart attack than people who have more close, loving relationships with people. Also, there are a lot of traditional systems of medicine, both Western and Oriental. The liver health has a lot to do with anger. And so, being irritable and venting anger a lot can also cause a lot of damage and so forth to your liver. So what are some remedies? Well, one of the remedies is rose. Now, the rose family in general is full of bioflavonoids and vitamin C and a lot of other nutrients that actually cool tissue irritation. But on an energetic level, when you think of roses, you think of a rose as a gift of love or an expression of love. And rose actually has the ability to help open the heart for us to be more loving, both used as a flower essence and as an essential oil. It's a remedy that comforts people who are grieving or sad, but it also can calm people who are irritated and angry. So on the physical level, rose hips with their vitamin C and bioflavonoids can help to tone blood vessels, make them so that they don't break and you get easy bruising or capillary whatever, and reduce cardiovascular irritation. But rose as a remedy can also help cool people so they're less irritable, less angry, and more open-hearted with other people. If you look at hawthorn, which is also in the rose family, which has been traditionally used as a cardiovascular remedy, it also helps again with reducing that inflammation or that irritation of the tissues, helping the tissue cope with that in a healthy way. But as a flower essence, it helps with the heartbreak and disappointment and bitterness with romance, which again, that heartbreak and bitterness often leads us to become angry and so forth. So hawthorn can also help to ease some of the emotional states that move us towards heart disease, not just the physical conditions. And if you look at a lot of the other plants in the rose family, a lot of them have very similar properties. In fact, think about, calling someone my peach, or you're the apple of my eye, or cherries. A lot of these we associate with the idea of love. She had cherry red lips, raspberries, which are, raspberry leaf is a remedy for mothers, okay, for that nurturing energy. A lot of these berries contain remedies, and in fact, if you listen to Mimi's webinar on cardiovascular tone, using a lot of these berries and fruits that have bioflavonoids helps you have healthier blood vessels and veins. But all of these are rose family plants. Aren't they all sweet? Isn't this family such a loving family to give us all these wonderful, sweet, juicy, loving fruits that we often associate with gifts of love? So you can see the loving energy that's present in this particular family. And I don't have time to go into all of the signatures and everything of why that's so, but it's interesting. Here's another one that is interesting, willow. If you look at willows bend very easily. They're very flexible. Now we know that willow as an herb reduces inflammation and fever. Willow basically has the ability to help people bend, whether their joints are stiff, meaning they can't move because their joints are inflamed and frozen and locked up. But it also works as a flower remedy to help people forgive, to let go of resentment and bitterness, anger that's binding up their life and inflaming their life, so that they can learn to move with the flow of life instead of fighting it so much and resisting it so much. because a lot of times the anger comes from resisting what is and trying to fight what is and trying to change what is instead of accepting it and deciding what I'm going to do about it. In other words, I'm trying to change what's not in my control, right? Instead of trying to deal with what is in my control. These are some other flower remedies for vented anger. Calendula, which helps people who wound other people with their words to be more aware of how their language is affecting people. Chamomile, which helps people who are peevish and irritable beyond what the situation calls for. Holly, which is for people who are angry and because they're jealous and suspicious because they don't feel like they get the love they need. Impatience is for people who are racing around and they're so wanting to get things done that they become easily agitated and intolerant of other people because they're not moving fast enough or things aren't getting done quick enough. Oregon Grape, which is for people who assume hostile intentions, and basically they're projecting hostile intentions onto other people who, when the hostile intentions aren't really there. Poison Oak is an interesting one. It's for people who are very sensitive, but because they're sensitive, they create a wall that you cannot get close to them. They cope with that sensitivity by putting up a big wall of anger and hostility to protect themselves, so they won't let you get close to them so that you can't get close enough to them to hurt them. Sagebrush is a good remedy for letting go of past abuse, which helps get rid of anger. And Snapdragon is a remedy for people who lose their temper. So these are all flower remedies, but some of these are also herbal remedies. And like with chamomile, small doses of chamomile, just the plant, have that tendency. And I've also found that you can use small doses of the Oregon Grape herb as a tincture to get a similar effect, although I prefer the flower essence. Now let's switch and talk about suppressed anger. Okay, when anger is suppressed, a person has a difficult time saying no to other people. They basically bury their own needs, they bury their own wants, trying to please other people and take care of them. So suppressing anger causes you to lose your personal power and allows others to leech off of you, which drains your energy because you basically acquire energy parasites. You've got people who are controlling you for their own interest, and you're not receiving a benefit from that exchange. So that drains your energy. You wind up with low energy, you feel discouraged, fatigue, loss of enthusiasm, and depression, and that also leads to a whole bunch of immune stuff that goes on with people. Someone asked this question, and here's the answer to it. Yeah, if you have a habit of suppressing your anger, you can become more prone to infections. You can become more prone to parasites. Your immune system won't stand up for you when you don't have the energy to want to stand up for yourself. And that anger that you feel over not being treated the way you want can cause you to beat yourself up, which I see often happening in autoimmune disorders. And I've never seen a person who has cancer who knows how to stand up for themselves, who doesn't, who doesn't have a lot of resentment to work through because they've been giving and giving and giving to others and haven't gotten back what they need. Now, I'm not saying that a person with cancer always has that, but so far, every person I've worked with cancer has had that. And I've read research that shows that there is a definite personality profile that people with cancer have that tendency because it's eating them alive, you see. And so I don't have time to go into all of the depth of what I understand about this from 25 years of working with it, but I definitely see it, and it's why I work with that aspect of it all the time. In fact, I have a prescription for people like this. It's called I got it from, basically it's a modification from Dr. Paul Pearsall, the pleasure prescription. You have to make a list of 10 things that are enjoyable to you and do one of them every day. And every person who's ever come to talk to me who has cancer, when I say make a list of 10 things you enjoy, they say, what? They don't know what they enjoy. They're so out of touch with what brings them pleasure and happiness, they don't know how to make the list. And I have to start coaching them on ideas of what they could put on their list to do for themselves because they're so used to taking care of everybody else and neglecting themselves. Detoxification gets compromised. You wind up not being able to get rid of toxins as efficiently because your urinary system turns off because your piss is off. You're pissed off. Your you can't, let go of things. And so you get a lot of, environmental illness and sensitivities and stuff. And also anger contributes to shallow breathing, a hiatal hernia, tension in the neck and shoulders, which can result in frequent headaches, feeling like everything is a pain in the head. And ultimately, your shoulders get so tense that you wind up hunched over and you get a Dowinger's hump and you wind up having a very defeated posture. So what this looks like is your boundaries collapse, and basically other people are controlling you for their ends, and you're not able to stand up for yourself and say no to them. And I illustrate this as fear and sadness, yellow and blue, which create green, kind of taking over your life, and you don't have the ability to get aggressive and say no. Okay, so Yarrow is a great great herb for healing wounds and also for reducing fevers, helping the body fight off the infection and that's associated with a high fever. So I use Yarrow a lot as an herb to help, fight colds and flu. I typically combine it with elderflower and peppermint, and it's been my standard remedy for colds, flu, and fever for kids, and even works quite well for adults for many years. As a flower remedy, Yarrow helps people develop healthier emotional boundaries. It helps them basically so they don't feel responsible for what they're not responsible for, because you see, the rescuer feels like it's my fault this other person is unhappy. It's my fault that this other person is da-da-da-da-da. I have to fix them. I have to rescue them. I have to sacrifice myself so they can be happy. This helps you get clear. Okay, what is my responsibility? What is not my responsibility? Where is the boundary? And there's white Yarrow helps with the boundary. Pink Yarrow helps with when you're an emotional sponge, when you're oversensitive to other people's emotions. And I can't remember, the golden Yarrow is another take on that, but all of them have to do with helping you have better boundaries. Now, when your sense of self-esteem has been shattered because you were traumatized and abused as a child, and I routinely find that when parents bring kids to me that are always sick, they inevitably have very low self-esteem. Something has shattered their sense of self-esteem and their self-image, and basically they feel traumatized and abused. And Echinacea, of course, we use as an herb to boost the immune system. It's particularly good for helping boost the immune system and fighting bacterial infections. But the flower essence really helps a person restore their sense of self, not self. Because the essence of immunity is to be able to say, this should be part of self, and that should not be part of self. In other words, this particular cell in the body is a bacteria. It should be eliminated. This other cell is one of my cells, and it should be preserved. Or this is a toxin, it should be eliminated. This is a good nutrient, and it should be received. But on the physical level, on the emotional level, that's this particular situation is good for me, and I should, let it in and go with it. Or this situation is not good for me, and I should say no to it. And this Echinacea helps with that restoration. Also, thistles can be really helpful for this on the level of the liver. If you think about all the thistles, they're prickly, very plants. They're out there. They don't let you get close to them, and they're hard to kill. I've seen, where they've sprayed herbicides over a field that's got thistles in it, and a lot of the thistles will wilt for a few days, and then they bounce back. They have this toughness. They can resist the being poisoned, which is why they can be really helpful for us to resist this modern day environment with all the chemicals that we're having. But they also have that energy within them of that protecting myself, being able to protect myself and defend myself against what would harm me in the environment. One more remedy that's not used as an herb but is used as a flower essence, and I love this picture because you can almost see the little monkey face staring at you in this picture. I always imagine the little monkey is sticking their tongue out at me, because the monkey flowers help you face things that you have a hard time seeing. So this one, Scarlet Monkeyflower, helps you acknowledge scarlet emotions like anger and lust, and that you may be suppressing. Acknowledge they're there and find a way to communicate them openly and honestly. Again, this is making me angry. I don't want this to continue. So here are some other remedies for the suppressed anger side of things. Black cohosh, that's a good remedy for people who feel trapped and unable to free themselves from abusive situations. Century, which is for people who are too hard on themselves and they allow other people to, they try too hard to please other people and don't take care of themselves. Fuchsia is for people who, when they should be getting angry, they cry. In other words, they can express their hurt, but they can't express their anger. Gorse is for feeling discouraged, despair, and hopelessness. Pine is for people who are overly critical and blame themselves for things that really aren't their fault. They're really the faults and problems of other people, but they're taking the blame on themselves, and it teaches them not to be so harsh with themselves. Walnut's an interesting one. It's basically for people pleasers who were overly controlled as children, and they never were able to make a healthy break from that parental authority, that parental domination. So they've never really fully developed their sense of self. And again, it's interesting that walnut is used as an anti-parasitic agent, but as a flower remedy, it works to help fend off energy parasites. It helps you get rid of the people who are leeching off of you in your life. So there's this parallel with the herb working on multiple levels of our being, because the plant itself is a living thing and it has more than one level of being too. Willow helps overcome the anger and resentment. We talked about that one. And mustard, which is for a sense of gloom, like black cloud depression, really deep melancholy. Now, let's move on to the idea of grief. And to understand grief, we have to understand desire. We just talked about saying no. What about saying yes? Desire is what lets us say yes. When we love something, we usually use that word love to mean desire. We want to let it in. We want to allow it to be part of our life. So our body contracts to push things away. It expands to let things in. When we love something, when we're in love, we get vasodilation. The blood vessels dilate and the blood flow increases to our senses and to our skin. That effect of that increased blood flow causes our skin to become warmer. So that's why we talk about love being warm. Love isn't cold, love is warm. Our skin glows. Our eyes sparkle. We feel warm, we feel open, we embrace life. That's why when you're in love, everything seems more beautiful, everything seems better, because you're more open and more able to feel what is pleasurable. That same energy in the body is what is pulling in nutrients, what is pulling in oxygen, what is giving us what we need to sustain ourselves, because it's the ability to say yes, to draw in nutrition. So you have assimilation and elimination. Elimination is linked to anger. Assimilation is linked to desire or love. Now, healthy grief involves the fact that anytime we love anything, there are times when we get disconnected from it. Sometimes the disconnection is temporary, like we have a fight or an argument or a disagreement, and sometimes the connection is permanent. Someone dies, or we get divorced, or we break up, or whatever. And when we have a loss of something that we love, the amount of pain we feel is synonymous with how much it means to us. In other words, the feeling of pain is proportionate to how much it meant to us. So the feeling of pain is really a sign of how much we loved that. And so when we feel that, it's traumatizing. We go into shock, and in shock, the blood retreats from the skin, moves into the internal organs. It moves actually into the chest cavity, swelling all the blood vessels in the chest and making us feel this sense of pressure and tension in our chest that feels like our heart is breaking, like it's going to burst. And when we give in to that feeling, we cry, we sob, we wail, we moan, we might even scream because it hurts so bad. That act of crying, grieving, screaming, expressing the pain, which is healthy, basically gets the blood moving again. It creates vasodilation. It opens us back up so we can feel things again. Tears are always a sign that our heart is opening. Whether whether the tears are in pain or whether they're in joy, tears are a good sign because they mean our heart is opening again. Healthy grief is an expression of love, and it's an expression of an open, vulnerable heart, one that is capable of feeling love and connection. Now, when we vent grief, obviously when we lose something, it's painful. Now, but if we don't want to deal with the pain, if we don't want to have to go through the crying and we don't have to go through the grieving process, and definitely a lot of us don't want to have to do that because in our culture we haven't created any support mechanism for that. I've read about some native cultures that allowed people a year to grieve. If they lost their loved one or lost a child, they were allowed a year to grieve. The tribe, the community, made space for them to be in grief for a year. It takes about a year to grieve. But in our society, a couple of weeks later, you're supposed to be back at work and acting like everything's fine. No, we don't have much room for that. So what we wind up doing is we wind up trying to get others to sympathize with us. Sympathy becomes a drug, and we can become so habituated to trying to get sympathy that we create this wonderful story that we love to tell other people about what victims we are and how hurt we've been, so we can constantly be seeking sympathetic allies. And when we become victims, we whine and complain, and we try to manipulate other people into feeling sorry for us, so they'll give us that nice little fix of sympathy, but that doesn't really fix the problem. So when you're in that, you tend to have the inability to let go. The body becomes sluggish, damp, swampy. I've often seen people develop respiratory problems after they've had a severe loss and they haven't allowed themselves to grieve it. I had a lady come in once who was telling me she has this, this problem with her lungs, and she's had it for several years, and she takes all these herbs and nothing seems to make it go away, and it never seems to get better. So I asked her a question that I've asked a lot of people with that. I said, okay, so when did this start? Well, it started 3 years ago. I said, did you lose anyone close to you 3 years ago? She said, my husband died. I said, did you really love him? She said, yes. I said, and she said, and in fact, as I think about it, I get sick every year on the anniversary of his death. And I said, have you allowed yourself to grieve? She says, I can't. I've had to be strong. So I make space for them to grieve. I make space for them to cry. I make safe space for them to let out the pain. And then you know what I find is that with some flower essences to help them through the grieving process, and the lung problems go away. Ah, amazing. Okay? Amazing how many lung problems are related to grief. Now, when it comes to treating this kind of stagnation and toxicity, a lot of the herbal remedies we use for it are bitters, and bitters are really good at dispelling this swampy stagnation in people, especially when there's a lot of congestion and mucus and stuff. But if you think about the idea of bitter, taking the bitter with the sweet, learning how to deal with our bitter experiences, learning how to drink our bitter cup of herbal tea, it helps us psychologically handle bitter moments. It says, I can handle the bitterness. I can swallow it. I can allow myself to feel the pain and go through it. And so I've given some examples of some bitters that people use, and I'm going to also talk about one here in particular. Wormwood and sagebrush, both in the Artemisia genus. Wormwood is used in the Bible as a symbol of bitterness. And so if you've ever tasted it, it is immensely bitter, and it's used to get rid of parasites, which, but it's also kind of a tonic to the digestive tract. Sagebrush, which is also in the Artemisia genus, is used as a flower essence to help let go of the past, let go of painful experiences, release it, move on, okay? So again, the bitters can have that quality. One of the flower essences I use a lot for this kind of thing is bleeding heart. Just look at that little flower. It looks exactly like a heart that's been torn open at the bottom with a little like bleeding, like crying. This is a very important flower essence. This is the one I typically give to people who are grieving due to breakups, death, or divorce. One of the things this teaches is that you can't control what you love. You can't own it. It helps you learn to love more freely and unconditionally, that you can't control what you're in love with. You can only love it. Also, when people have lost heart, they're so sad, they're so discouraged, they lost their confidence. Borage helps them take heart and find hope, joy, and optimism. It gives them the courage to face those difficulties. Here are some other remedies. Oh, I put in bleeding heart here already, but chicory, people who are needy and possessive, and fuchsia again, and California wild rose, which we talked about earlier, and holly. And when people are in deep anguish and feeling alone, love lies bleeding. That's a really good one. Penstemon for feeling sorry for oneself, that life is unfair and you're persecuted. Sweet chestnut from severe, profound despair and anguish. So there are flower remedies that can help a person through this grieving process, but it's important for people to understand that it's important to cry. It's important to let yourself cry. You don't have to be strong. Yes, you feel like you're going to fall apart, but you need to fall apart once in a while. That falling apart is really a process of like reopening your heart and letting you feel again. And if you don't go through it, you're going to be forever stuck with the pain. That's one of the lessons I learned. Now, sometimes the pain gets so intense that you decide, I'm never going to risk being in love again. I'm never going to let myself get that close to anybody. I'm going to build up walls and I'm going to protect myself. And you basically become hard of heart. And if you become hard enough of heart, you totally lose empathy and compassion for other people. And you become very inflexible, very rigid, very judgmental, very dogmatic. And if you go far enough, you can even become a criminal because you don't give two hoots about how you hurt other people to get what you want. Now, there's a lot subtler forms of hardness of heart than becoming a full-blown, axe murderer, but basically it all comes from the suppressed grief, never having healed of the grief, and being in so much pain that you really don't care anymore. Your heart has no capability of empathy or compassion anymore. Okay, to a certain degree, heart problems, in my experience, come from hardening the heart. And there's a really great book by a psychologist named Alexander Lowen that he wrote that explains this in fantastic detail. It's called Love, Sex, and Your Heart by Alexander Lowen. And you read that book and you'll have a whole new take on where heart attacks come from. I don't have time to explain it tonight, but also people lose sweetness in life. You become hard, and when you become hard, your life is no longer sweet. And a lot of times what you'll do is you'll just eat a bunch of sugar trying to make life sweet. I've found very often the constant craving for sugar is the lack of joy and sweetness in one's life, and that can lead to diabetes and blood sugar problems because the person just basically is starving for pleasure. But the experience of pleasure is something you have to surrender to. You have to be able to get into that open, vulnerable state to experience pleasure, because that's how you let things in. And if you can't get there, then you've cut yourself off of the ability to experience joy and pleasure. So that's what I explained: distant, hardened. I mentioned poison oak, also poison ivy. I learned from David Winston, those are warrior plants that before the white man came, that they weren't a lot in North America, but they've proliferated like thistles because we've damaged the environment so much. They're growing, trying to protect the plant, protect the environment, but they're overly protective. I mean, they're super protective, and a person who needs that flower essence is basically almost impossible to get close to. They really are afraid of close contact with others, and when you're trying to love them, they can actually hurt you really bad, because they're trying to push you away because love scares them, and they lack compassion and empathy. Yerba Santa, which is a respiratory remedy, is a really good one for when you have this constriction and pain in your chest because you haven't gone through the grieving process. And it can help open a person up who's closed themselves off and has chronic respiratory problems due to the suppression of grief. Mallows are really soothing and nourishing, and when you have dry, hacking, irritated coughs, I find that a dry cough, a constant chronic dry cough, is often linked to the need to get something off your chest. Again, to release that tension or whatever. And mallow as a flower essence is for people who appear cold and aloof but are really shut down because they're protecting their vulnerability. Mallows are very nourishing, soothing plants. They're again like the rose family, very loving, but loving in the sense of being soft and helping us become soft again, and helping the lungs become moist again. More remedies. You have Beech, which is people who are overly critical, judgmental, and intolerant. Rose again. Oak, this is an interesting one. These are people who are strong-willed, but they don't know when to surrender. They don't know when to give up. They don't know when to let someone help them. Vervain, people who are fanatically devoted to cause to the point that they can literally bowl over the top of people with their fanaticism towards achieving what they want to do. Vine, which is for people who are domineering and tyrannical, and water violet for people who are aloof. So these are, again, remedies that all can deal with this issue of hardness. And finally, we come to fear. Fear has to do with maintaining equilibrium in the body, which is basically you have these three processes of assimilation, elimination, and metabolism or regulation. The regulation where assimilation and elimination meet, where food is converted to energy and then waste is created. This is the decision point. This is the point where we have to make a decision. Are we going to push this away, or are we going to let it in? Are we going to fight, or are we going to flee? What are we going to do to handle what life brings at us? And that requires making choices, okay? And fear comes in when choices have the possibility of great reward or great pain. I mean, we can be scared when something like there's a possibility of a romantic relationship, because we know that a romantic relationship could also wind up with pain, but it also has great reward, so it's kind of scary. And fear strongly affects the regulatory systems of the body, the nerves and the glands, which regulate metabolism. And what's interesting is that the biological response of excitement, what you get when you go on a roller coaster ride, is the same physiological reaction as fear, only the brain is interpreting different. So when you perceive that you can handle the danger, we call it excitement. When you perceive you can't handle the danger, it becomes anxiety. And so how our brain is interpreting that, how we're interpreting what life is happening to us, makes the difference. And this is the emotion that most has to do with our thoughts and how we're perceiving the world. Fear is overcome by making a choice, by channeling the energy created by the fear into doing something. Then that energy moves in the body and creates activity. So like whenever I have a major talk in front of a large group of people and I'm backstage, I'm feeling the fear. But I can handle the fear. So the fear is interpreted in me as excitement. And when I stand up on stage and I move in front of that audience and I flow with my fear/excitement, it contributes to my performance. Now, if I let the fear paralyze me so I couldn't get on stage, then that would be different. But the courage is that I get on stage and trust that I can move through it, and that's what courage is. When we vent fear, we're afraid to make the choices. So what we do is we try to get other people to make the choices for us. We try to pawn off the responsibility for deciding what we should do with this to other people. Now, it's one thing to go get information, like go to a doctor and find out what's wrong. It's another thing to let that person use fear to intimidate you into doing something that you don't feel good about. It's fine to collect information, but we don't want to give over our right to choose our own life path to other people, because we think that they're experts or authority figures or whatever. We still have to recognize that when they give us information, the responsibility for the choice is still ours, and we have to still make a decision. Is this in my best interest or is it not? Vented fear manifests as worry and stress, which causes anxiety, tension, and eventually burnout. Excessive fear adversely affects our glands, our urinary system, our stomach, our digestive system, and our nerves. Of course, adaptogens reduce this stress response, and so where we're having this constant stress response in modern society, this can be a very good physical remedy for calming down the fight or flight response, because one of the problems is that most of the stresses we face in modern society, we have to think to get our way out of. They're not things that we can just react to physically, like a bear in the woods. They're something we actually have to act to logically, and the problem with the fear response is it tends to shut down our logical brain. So adaptogens, by calming down that stress response and those stress hormones, help us stay more logical and able to think more clearly through problems, which is why they're such a boon. Whenever you're under a lot of stress, you should always take adaptogens to help you get through it. Flower essences can really help with this courage to face life. Penstemons are very upright plants. If you see their growth pattern, they grow very erect. Their flowers tend to point kind of upwards, like an open mouth, like expressing themselves. And as an energy, they tend to promote courage, such as there's mountain pride, which is used for people who are afraid to assert themselves, who vacillate when they're trying to make a choice. This one penstemon is used for people who feel sorry for themselves and they can't cope with life's difficulties and they need to have courage to face them. And there's a red penstemon that's used for people who are afraid to take risks. So the penstemons as flower essences really help with this issue of courage and facing fears. So does aspen. You know, you look at aspen and the leaves tremble in the slightest breeze. That's why it's called Populus tremuloides, or the trembling poplar. Well, people have vague fears that basically they're afraid of the unknown. They don't have the confidence to deal with change or the future. They're in constant kind of low-grade state of anxiety. This is a good remedy for them. Also, the monkey flowers, again, help us face our fears, help us face what we don't want to look at. The mimulus, which is the Bach flower remedy, is for generally helping us to face things we're afraid of. I mentioned that Scarlet Monkeyflower helps people face their anger when they're afraid of their anger. Sticky Monkeyflower helps people face their sexual feelings when they're afraid of their sexual feelings. And Purpy Monkeyflower helps people face their fears of retribution if they suddenly find themselves feeling like their the religious convictions of their family and community aren't right for them anymore, and now they've got to face the rejection of dealing with that and being forthright. Other remedies include dill, which is for people who are really easily scattered and overwhelmed. Century for people who are weak-willed and can't stand up for themselves. Echinacea, again, for the traumatized self-esteem. Garlic for people who can't speak up for themselves. Think of, you know, garlic breath, you know. Do I dare, you know, speak up when I've got garlic on my breath? Mountain pride, which is that one we just said that's a penstemon. And Scleranthus for people who have a hard time making decisions. Now, our last emotion, we'll state we want to deal with, is suppressed fear. Okay, when we suppress fear, we've got this energy saying, do something, do something, do something, do something. So how do you suppress an energy that's saying do something? By doing something. But the something you choose to do is something that is not responsible. It's reckless, it's careless, it's stupid. It's because, in other words, okay, I'm feeling anxiety, so let me drink. Let me smoke pot. Let me, you know, watch TV, engage in promiscuous sex, you know, anything that we are doing to run away from life. Now, I know it's obviously, there's one thing of taking some time to enjoy something, but it becomes addictive and compulsive and reckless when it's used to dodge responsible behavior and facing the things that we have to make tough decisions about and making those choices. Instead, we're running away from those choices and trying to hide from them through these behaviors. So when you suppress fear, you lose backbone. You literally lose integrity inside of yourself. You can't hold yourself together because you don't know how to take the responsibility, and you're probably going to wind up toxic from your poor health habits too. So this creates this impulsive, ungrounded, addictive personality by suppressing the fear. So, here's an interesting one. Oak is a remedy that's for, you know, toning up tissue that's weak and flabby. But as a flower essence, you know, it's for people who life has broken them down. They can't cope anymore. They're actually a strong person, but they just can't hold up to the stress anymore. And in fact, Matthew Wood in his book, the Book of Herbal Wisdom, says that this is a good remedy for kind of teetotaling alcoholics. They got to have a drink to get through the day because they can't cope without that drink. I thought that was an interesting thing. Black cohosh is an interesting one because it grows out of this black, gnarled, tangled root. and goes up into this white spike of flowers. And what it does is when people are trapped in abusive relationships, in self-destructive lifestyles, it helps them see their way back to the light, see their way to untangle themselves from what they've got themselves tangled in, and basically confront the situation rather than run away from it. One of the things that often happens with these people is they hide their pain. They can't face their pain inside of themselves, and they can't express it to anyone else. Agrimony, which is an interesting remedy because it's actually a remedy that both eases tension and also tones up tissue. It's as a flower essence. Whenever you see someone who's tense inside, really wound up inside, but smiling and cheerful on the outside, that's an agrimony person. They're in denial of their pain. They're in denial of what they're going through. Again, some other flower remedies: aspen, basil, California poppy for people who are attracted to glitter and glitz and glamour and think that, you know, being famous or rich is going to make them happy and solve all their problems, and so they often like gamble or do careless or stupid things or chase gurus or whatever, instead of seeking to understand themselves and what they need to do. Chestnut bud is a basic remedy to break addictive habits. Clematis is for escapism, for basically going off into daydreams. Milkweed is you do drugs or you eat or you do whatever to numb yourself so that you don't have to feel because you can't face what you're feeling. Morning glory is a great, I mean, you ever seen bindweed or morning glory? I mean, I have bindweed in my garden, some wild morning glory, and if you don't control it, it grows over the top of everything, smothers it, and when you till the soil, it chops up the roots and makes more of it. The only way to get rid of it is to dig it out by the roots, and that's really the case with all of these addictive, self-defeating behaviors. You can't just plow them under. You have to get them out by the roots, otherwise they smother your life and they take over. So I love that remedy for this. Nicotinia, which is, it helps with addiction to tobacco, and again, sagebrush for letting go of habits. So obviously this has been kind of an introduction to this subject. I've been studying this for 25 years, and I've spent 25 years assembling these ideas. I've written up a lot of these ideas in a book called The Heart's Key to Health, Happiness, and Success, which is available from treelight.com. And we also have, I'm going to be doing more seminars and teaching on this. You can check out our mailing list at modernherbaleducation.com. And by the way, which is also now modernherbalmedicine.com. My son has been changing the domain name for it, but both of them will work. And the handouts, I posted them there, and then they'll also be posted on the AHG website. And then I have this list of books. These are some of my books on flower essences, or books that link, emotional and physical symptoms, or understand this more intuitive nature of plants. And then I would want to just briefly talk about the people who sponsored this webinar tonight, the American Herbalists Guild. I really believe in and support the American Herbalists Guild. I think it's wonderful that we have an organization that's devoted to furthering the practice of making herbal medicine a profession that gets the recognition it deserves. So these are the benefits of AHG membership. I don't want to read them all, but they are on the handout. And so there's a lot of membership benefits. One I want to point out is we're going to be doing all webinars and seminars next year for AHG members, like this one, only there'll be some that are for members only. And so I believe we're going to try to do 6 or 8, something like that. So for $50 a year for general membership, hey, that's not bad. You get a lot of education for that, as well as other things. You get the journal, which has a lot of great information about herbs and so forth. You also can participate in local chapters in various areas, and you can promote books and so forth. If you want to talk about professional membership, you get some special benefits. There's a special application for that. You can also become a student member if you're enrolled in a educational program. And if you have a school, you can also have a school membership, so you can promote your school. and there's also the AHG Council of Students. So all of this information is in the handouts for you to review. But please support the AHG. Just to become a general member is not that expensive. Maybe I said it was wrong. Maybe it's actually $60 a year. I don't remember, but it's not that expensive. And we also in the AHG need volunteers. It's a volunteer organization. It's run by volunteers, and so there's a lot of things that we can use help with if you've got expertise or whatever and would like to volunteer to help. We are currently seeking help in all of these areas. So I'm going to give a little bit of time here for some questions and answers. I appreciate all of you who've listened to tonight's webinar. You will be able, as I mentioned, to get the handouts, and the recording will be posted on the AHG website, so you'll be able to go there and download it, as well as the handouts will be posted there. Someone says, suggestions for a person who seems to have an emotional life theme of a codependency, thinks she's not where she wants to be because she doesn't have a man in her life. Well, I mean, I can't, obviously specifically understand everything she's going through with that, but there are flower essences. If you get the FES Repertory, which was one of the books I listed, there are a number of flower essences that directly deal with the issue of codependence and neediness and immaturity, where you're not like growing up and taking responsibility for your own life. What are the ways to positively deal with suppressed anger? That's a very good question. In my book, The Heart's Key, I explain how to set personal boundaries and what a personal boundary is in quite detail. But what you have to do is first realize how you're allowing people to make you in some way feel like you're obligated to do things for them that you actually resent and don't want to do, and there's no benefit for you. And then you have to figure out how to start saying no, or how to start negotiating for your needs and saying, I cannot continue to provide this benefit for you in your life if I don't get something back, because it's burning me out and I can't continue to do it. And therefore, this is what I have chosen to do. Now, when you set a boundary, one of the important things is that if you are trying to use the boundary as a way to manipulate the other person into changing, it is not going to work. You have to make the boundary a decision that you're going to stick to whether the other person changes or not, because it's a choice that's going to benefit you. And so it's really getting in touch with loving yourself more. What I explain is when you vent anger, you're not loving other people, but when you suppress anger, you're not loving yourself. You're basically loving other people more than you love you. And you're not supposed to love other people more than you love you. You're supposed to love other people the way you love you, which means having healthy respect for both them and you. The poison ivy, poison oak flower essence is so homeopathically diluted that it would not cause any problems with someone who is sensitive to poison ivy. In fact, RHIAHG, which is homeopathic poison ivy, is used as an antidote to people who are sensitive to poison ivy. If you want to find the AHG website, it's American Herbalists Guild.com, and just Google American Herbalists Guild, and it will come up right on the top of the page. And also, if you registered for this webinar, you will get an email basically directing you to where the recording and the handouts are on the AHG website. So it will be sent to you in an email. What do you do when someone has opposing emotions? We all have opposing emotions, And so what happens is when you're on one side of the fence, you take the flower essences that deal with that, and on the other side of the fence, you take some flower essence to deal with the other side. But again, some of those are vacillations, because when you have poor personal boundaries, you can actually vacillate between suppressing your anger and venting your anger. In fact, you often do that. What happens is you'll suppress your anger to the point that it'll explode on you. And you can also be, have any one of a mixture of these emotional energies, less like you can blend colors into millions of shades of subtle shades of colors. You can blend these emotional states inside of you into a lot of very subtle things. This is just to give you an overview of the basic concept and the basic emotions that we're dealing with. Someone says sometimes one has a chronic situation, say family members who won't deal with issues, which can create an ongoing sense of grief. Yes, it can. And again, the issue is, obviously I cannot control what is going on with other people. I can influence it, but I can't control it. And what I tell people over and over again is, if you work on emotionally healing yourself, you will actually be better able to help others. When you try to heal other people, you're trying to change what's not in your control. And the best thing to do is to try to understand your own emotional issues, because we always have our own emotional dynamic that's contributing to the situations that we find ourselves in. So if we work on healing our own emotional dynamics, then that will help us be able to more effectively work with other people. It's really kind of the scriptural thing of remove the 2x4 from your own eye before you try to remove the dust speck from your neighbor's eye. It's easy for us to see the emotional issues of people around us. It's much harder for us to see our own emotional issues. Any specific remedies for teens? I used flower essences with my children when they were young and growing up. I find them very helpful. It also helps just to understand emotional states better. If you've got a teen that's really angry, then they're not feeling loved. They're feeling threatened, and they're feeling like they've got to defend themselves because someone's tried to control them. And in all likelihood, a lot of parents are very controlling, and they don't know how to lead their children instead of try to control their children, and there's a big difference. I would highly recommend the book Children, the Challenge by Rudolf Dreikurs, who really explains the difference between rewarding and punishing kids and setting boundaries and being able to have natural and logical consequences. That's partly how I learned this whole thing about how to healthily deal with anger, is from working with my kids and using the principles of that book, Children, the Challenge by Rudolf Dreikurs. If you're in an ongoing situation, just like taking adaptogens when you're under a period of stress, you can also take flower essences to help you stay centered and focused and imbalanced when you're in balance when you're in an ongoing situation, because the flowers can help keep bringing you back to a more centered place so that you're acting from a more centered place instead of acting from your imbalance. Is there a mix of flower essence most useful for typical cancer patients' emotional state? Typically, the flower essences I use are tip for people who are in that cancer situation are the ones that are for suppressed anger and vented fear. Because I find the other emotional state I see in cancer people is everybody's telling them, you're going to die if you don't do this. And it's not just the medical doctors who are telling them that, it's all the holistic people who are telling them that. And they got to have the courage to make their own choices and decide what's right for them. And so I give them flower essences to buoy them up with courage to make choices and make decisions and do what's in their best interest, and flower essences that help them deal with the repressed anger. But like I said, the main thing I do is I give them the pleasure prescription, which is I tell them to go ahead and make a list of 10 things that they find very pleasurable, like getting a massage, taking a walk in nature, soaking in a nice Epsom salt bath with lavender oil, or anything that's physically pleasure to their body, and doing something for themselves to take care of themselves every day. And I find that that ability to find joy in your life is a huge factor in healing, because why do you want to live if there's no joy in your life, if there's nothing in life that's making you happy, and so forth. Someone said that homeopathic Echinacea lamara, Ignatia space Lamara, is good for when you have opposing emotions. And I did, someone asked about books, and I did in this notes, and you will get again an email telling you where to go to hand out the notes and everything. I did list a whole bunch of books, and a number of those books are good books to, help you learn more about flower essences and emotional healing. Someone asks, what is the I didn't actually talk about the normal dose of flower essences. There is usually anywhere from 3 to 10 drops under the tongue 2 or 3 times a day. It's Ignatia. Okay, Ignatia. Lamara, Lamara. Okay. Am I aware of yellow toad flax as an essence? No, I'm not aware of that one. I haven't ever used it. I get my essences primarily from FES Services. I really like them as a company. I think they produce a lot of great flower essences. And some of you are asking very specific questions about, specific people, which is hard for me to do without. Usually what happens when someone is trying to, like I'm in a phone consult, I ask a lot of questions to really get a good feel for the person's emotional state, what their situation is, before I start recommending flower essences. I mean, I've got over 250 flower essences in my collection, and I don't always have all of them in the top of my head, but as I start to talk to people, I can always, start to get some feeling. How to find practitioners for the information I presented tonight. You can find flower essence practitioners possibly. There's some of them are listed on the FES site. From what I'm teaching, my goal in the coming year is to go out and train people how to do this. I mean, I'm just barely launching, getting the real training of how to do this. So if you'd be interested in taking classes or whatever, just sign up on my email list and I'll let you know. I'm going to be teaching a longer webinar training program on this topic, one in December and an even longer one starting in January. Can flower essences positively affect emotional and physical imbalances that have been acquired through heredity? Yes, they can, because in my experience, a large part of what we call heredity is that we kind of literally inherit some of our family emotional issues. And so there are, just like there are physical issues that tend to run in families, like heart disease or diabetes or cancer, but you also see emotional issues like alcoholism and addiction and other unhealthy emotional patterns that run in families too. And there are flower essences that help you kind of break free from that. So there is residual alcohol in flower essences, but you can actually make them in glycerin. And so I do make flower essences in glycerin for people who can't tolerate alcohol. Someone who is sexually abused and is not grounded or is now fearful and not in their body, there are a number of specific flower remedies that deal with helping people who've been sexually abused. I don't have them off the top of my head, and I'm not going to, and actually it looks like I didn't stick my book in, well, there it is. For example, this is why I really like the FES repertory, because you can actually pull up and get a list of a bunch of different flower essences that relate to different issues. And so I already mentioned one, which is black cohosh, and a really good one for people who have reproductive problems due to past abuse that I learned about in Matthew Wood's book, 7 Herbs, Plants as Teachers, is the Easter lily. But again, just like with herbal medicine, what you recommend really is based on an evaluation of the individual person's needs. And that's going to vary from person to person, and it's a lot easier when I can talk and ask a lot of questions. We probably should end this webinar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close the webinar, stop the recording, say goodnight, and then I'm going to stay on the line because I don't want the recording to go too long, and just answer as many questions as I can. So again, thanks to all of you for attending tonight, and I hope that you've learned a lot of useful and valuable information, and that I've basically opened your minds to a whole new way of thinking about plants and thinking about healing. So thanks and good night.